there's pros and cons to Disney and Universal, and the interesting thing, which I would not have expected, and certainly 13, 14 years ago when we were going for the first time, I definitely wouldn't have seen this in my future, but it actually, my hottest take of all time is that if you have a small child, Universal is infinitely better than Magic Kingdom.
That was Jessica Liese talking about Universal Orlando, and you're listening to the Tomorrow Society podcast. Thanks so much for joining me here on episode 97 of the Tomorrow Society podcast. I am your host, Dan Heaton. First of all, before we start, I wanted to say that I hope you're all healthy and safe out there. I know this is an unprecedented time around the world with the spread of the coronavirus, and many of us, including me and my family, are basically spending a lot more time at home trying to isolate ourselves as much as possible just in order to halt the spread of the virus. And part of me has thought, well, should I continue to keep putting out podcast episodes? Does that diminish everything that's happening? And as I think about it more, I think, well, what's calming me down? What's keeping me relaxed and feeling good about the world? And it's definitely art. It's movies and music, and of course, other podcasts. I mean, the Season Pass just put out an amazing episode with Tony Baxter. And while I listened to that show, I wasn't thinking about my worries about everything that was going on in the world. And that's just one of many examples that are out there. Rob Cesternino is putting out so many shows with everyone involved with Rob as a podcast on Survivor and Australian Survivor and so many other things. I get a lot of joy out of those shows. And the more I think about it, I think that's a reason to keep doing this show, keep putting out episodes, especially because a lot of us are at home with our kids or just working from home, and having something that maybe for an hour you can listen to me talking about theme parks with a guest, and that'll help out a bit. So that's the way I'm starting to think about it. And I'm going to continue to put out shows and keep moving forward and hope that eventually things start to get back to some sort of normal state. My guest today is Jessica Liese. I've known Jess for a long time. She, in a way, kind of indirectly helped to start this podcast. Back in the spring of 2015, she reached out to me about becoming a co-host of a show she was doing covering the Amazing Race Canada for Rob as a podcast. I think it was season 3 of the show at that time. We've now hosted that show for 5 years every summer. And at the time, I hadn't started the Tomorrow Society blog, and I wasn't really thinking about doing a podcast. I'd been on some movie podcasts, but only as a guest. But being a co-host on that show and just really enjoying it, and being such a fan of podcasts myself for years and years and years, going back to the early 2000s, that made me, I think, more confident to, when I decided to try the podcast here, to really do it. And, you know, it's been going on for a while, around since that time. So it's really fun now to talk to Jess, who's a podcaster and a writer, but also a big fan of theme parks. And she has an interesting take about Universal Orlando and visiting that with her son, who's very young, and how different that is from the perception in a lot of ways about Disney versus Universal and what you should do as far as the ages of your kids. And we get to dig into a lot of other topics beyond that, covering Disney and what she likes and big issues about where the parks are going and attendance and crowds and everything else. And it's a lot of fun to do. Before we start, I did want to mention we recorded this show on March 4th, which was about a week and a half ago. And I have to mention that because there is a small section where we talk about crowds at Walt Disney World and what could possibly slow down the crowds. And I do mention the coronavirus and the potential that the parks might close. Now, at the time, I had no idea that that would end up happening less than 2 weeks later. But I wanted to mention when we recorded it because you might listen and think, well, Dan, they already closed them. But, you know, at the time, while the virus was spreading, it was not the same level of heightened awareness that we are at today and where things are going, especially here in the United States. I felt it was important to mention that just so you knew kind of the background for when this conversation took place. All right, well, let's get to it. Here is Jessica Liese. My guest today is a podcaster and writer who hosts shows on The Amazing Race, The Walking Dead, Star Trek Picard, and many, many other shows for Rob as a podcast and post-show recaps. She also writes for Primetimer.com, and most importantly, is my co-host every summer to recap The Amazing Race Canada on Rob as a podcast. It's Jessica Liese. Jess, thanks so much for being on the podcast.
Hey, Dan. Thanks for having me. I'm super excited to geek out about theme parks with you.
Yeah, it's fun because we've talked a lot about The Amazing Race and other things, but not about this. So I'm coming in knowing just the basics about what you think on this. I don't know that much, so it's fun. So I would love to know a little bit first, before we dig into some hot takes. What's your background with just theme parks and going to Disney World and Universal and everything?
Well, I never went to anything resembling a Disney park as a child. It was just too far away and kind of too expensive. And the first time that I actually visited a Disney property, I went to Disneyland and I was 26 years old. And it was just kind of love at first sight. It was just, we went on a day when, it was the day before I taped an episode of Jeopardy! So my parents had flown down to watch me play Jeopardy! And we decided the day before we would go to Disneyland, and we hired a car to take us there. And it was just like the whole thing was cursed. Like, we get out of the car at Disneyland and it just starts pouring rain. Like, the skies open up. And of course, in LA, it rains 12 days a year at most. And the great thing about it, though, the whole park empties out. So we got to do everything. Like, as long as the weather hadn't shut it down, it was just like, no line, get right back on. And so that ended up, it was kind of magical. And then the following year, my then boyfriend, now husband, and I went to Disney World in Florida for the first time. We went to Magic Kingdom and Epcot. And then every year since then, pretty much consistently, we've gone back and done a Disney thing. Sometimes we do 2 parks in a trip, and sometimes we do just one. But I've really come to treat the Orlando area especially like sort of a second home.
Well, I think your first trip, that's not something you're ever going to experience. So it lucked out, because you might have gone and it was super packed and been like, that's it. This weekend was a bust. I'm never going again. So I'm glad that worked out, because the parks lately are not that way very often. So I think that's great that you were able to do that. And so I know you've gone a lot to Universal too, which I don't talk about on the show as much as I should, just because I haven't gone as much recently. What interests you about going to Universal?
This is really great, Dan, because I feel like, I do the Amazing Race podcast on a Survivor podcast network. And now I'm coming on your Disney podcast to talk about Universal. So that's going to be a lot of fun. Yeah, we did Universal. I think the first trip to Orlando, we spent a day at Islands of Adventure, and it turns out there's pros and cons to Disney and Universal. And the interesting thing, which I would not have expected, and certainly 13, 14 years ago when we were going for the first time, I definitely wouldn't have seen this in my future. But it actually, my hottest take of all time is that if you have a small child, Universal is infinitely better than Magic Kingdom. And actually, in point of fact, most of the Disney properties. Like, we have had a great time my son is now 3, and he's had a great time at Epcot. He's had a great time at Magic Kingdom, loves Animal Kingdom, but Universal has really been our sweet spot. He's been twice, and both times it was just like, that was the highlight.
Wow. So, there's so many different ways I could ask this because, and I'm not really as concerned with the reputation because, I know the reputation Disney is, oh, it's magical. You take your kids over and over. But I'm just thinking practically here because I took my daughter to Universal. We went to both parks, but again, that was when she was 3, my older daughter, and she had fun. She went to Seuss Landing. We saw the animal show. We did ET. We did a lot of things, but I found that trip a little bit. What I ended up being was, okay, I'm going to go ride the Mummy and then I'll come back and meet you. Now I'm going to go do this or we're going to do this. There wasn't as much. So I had a great time on that day, but I felt a little selfish at times. So how has it worked out for you that hasn't happened as much, I guess?
Well, I think the main thing to do here is kind of compare and contrast because I think it really depends on what you're trying to get out of it and where you're getting your enjoyment. Because, yeah, absolutely, you go to Islands of Adventure and they have amazing coasters and they have these incredible immersive, like screen-based rides, but they also there's lots of little secret play areas. And if your kid is not at the age yet where they are invested in a particular character, they just want a character or a ride or a thing to play on, there's a lot more of that for them at Universal. And the main thing, the number one thing I think that Universal has that Disney does not have, and if they ever had this at Disney, like game over for everybody, it would just be a disaster. And I know why they don't have it. But at Universal, you can buy a thing called an Express Pass. And we got those in The Amazing Race, right, Dan?
Yes.
Yeah. So it's kind of the same thing. You can jump the line on every single ride in the park except for the really, really hot ticket rides. And so what that means is your toddler is not made to wait 20 minutes between every attraction. It's an extra $100 a person, so it's clearly not something that everybody can do every time. But we did the Express Pass this past trip, and it was magical because at that age, he was just about 3 at that point. He just wanted to do the same things over and over again, and it got a little repetitive for us, but we could get off the one fish, two fish ride and get right back on it. And he loved that. And we were there on, we were at Islands of Adventure on the Hagrid's Motorbike launch day.
Oh, wow.
And I was petrified that it was just going to be pandemonium in the park. And as a matter of fact, if you went anywhere near Harry Potter World, it was shoulder to shoulder people. It was 90 minutes to ride every Harry Potter ride, but the rest of the park, pretty empty. It was pretty okay. And so we took those express passes. We used the hell out of them. We spent, I think, 4 hours in Seuss Landing just doing those over and over again. And there's a lot of other great stuff that I can speak to that they have there that even if you don't have the express pass, it's enjoyable and it activates parts of the kid's brain that you don't normally expect are going to be activated at a theme park. The two big things that you can do that you really never have to wait in line for. If you go over to the Jurassic Park area, there's a thing called Camp Jurassic, which is like a big ropes course. And they just run off all their energy and tire themselves out. It's fabulous. And similarly, in the comic books, there's Popeye's ship, which is another like multi-story playground area. And that's the key thing. I think there's one of these that I know of in Magic Kingdom. It's a playground space behind the Dumbo ride in Fantasyland, and few people know about it. You can actually play on the play space while you're waiting to get on the Dumbos, I think, but that's the only one they have. And at Universal, I think I counted 8 of them across the 2 main parks. So if your kid needs to climb and needs to not like passively enjoy a ride, this is really great for them.
Yeah, that's a really good point because I think about it too in terms of, well, one thing too, the next time I go to Universal, if you stay, I mean, it costs more because, and you don't have the situation because you already have a place to stay that's different, but you stay at their on-site hotels, which I know aren't cheap, and you get front of the line for almost everything except for like Harry Potter, and you don't have to buy the express pass. So it's one of those things where you do the math and go, well, if I spend, then they're not like $1,000 a night, but if I spend $300 a night or whatever for only a couple nights, for those 2 or 3 days, I can get front of the line for almost everything. When I went, it was in January of that year, and that was when the last time I went with my daughter, it was like Hogsmeade was not the whole Harry Potter was open. And so it was so empty there, it wouldn't have even worth our money. But yeah, I mean, That one fish, two fish, red fish, blue fish attraction. My daughter, when she was 3, we rode that like 5 times in a row, and I got wet every time. She thought it was hilarious, and that was like her highlight. I think I have like 20 pictures of us riding that ride over and over. And to her, it was like, let's watch Dad get soaked over and over and over. But hey, that's a memory. That was 8 years ago, and I'm still thinking about it, so I can see it. I admit. I know Seuss Landing well, with the trolley in the sky and just with all the weird stuff there, and the Cat in the Hat, which is a very strange attraction. But
my kid loves that ride.
It spins you kind of hard, though, for a kid's ride, I will say.
Oh, no, he loves it. He actually, we noticed that some of the cars are different rates of spinning. So some of them will spin you super hard and some of them a little bit less hard. And he always wanted to be in the super hard spinning ones.
Yeah, well, my wife gets motion sickness, and we're like, we'll just go on this kid's ride. This won't be as bad. And she was just like, oh my gosh, please stop. One big thing, though, because I think about when I went to Disney, I mean, you didn't go when you were a kid. I'm not talking about I was 3, but when I remember going as a kid, and they're like Fantasyland and everything, and even Tomorrowland, there were some attractions that are not there anymore that had no waits, basically, that we rode so much. Like Mr. Toad's Wild Ride was a ride that we rode so much. There was this ride called If You Had Wings that we always rode. And some of these like kind of, I don't say they were bad rides, but like they had a Snow White ride that's gone now. They had a lot more that kind of thing that are still in Disneyland. And so I think though now, and I'm not trying to just make your point, I want you to make it, but I'm just saying now it's a little different too, just because some of those kind of goofy, not actually
like
goofy,
the A-ticket rides.
Yeah. They're not there anymore or anything.
Yeah.
So whereas you're mentioning even playgrounds and things, there are playgrounds at Disney World, but again, they used to have more things like that. And it's also just because it's so crowded. I don't think they focus. They want to hit all the headliners. They're not focusing as much now on the secondary ones because you can't have their now CEO get up on stage and say, okay, next year, our brand new thing is a playground. People will be like throwing stuff at him. So they're kind of stuck a little bit, maybe.
Yeah, I definitely get that. And I think there is something to be said. Like, I think you can still find some of those rides at Disney. Like, my personal favorite thing in the Magic Kingdom is the Carousel of Progress.
Oh, yes, that's great.
I could do that all day. I did not subject my child to it because I think that's really not his vibe. But it does seem like there are ways they could do that. I think they could do it the way that they did. They didn't advertise that when they expanded the Dumbo rides, they were going to build this playground area next to it. But it's there, and it's something you can use while you're waiting in line. And I think Disney excels. I think it's better for kids that are slightly older than my 3-year-old. They excel at putting things in a lot of the lines so that it doesn't feel like this endless slog of doing nothing so that you can sit on a ride for 3 minutes. Toy Story Midway Mania had a lot of they had the interactive Mr. Potato Head, and that stuff is really cool. But I think there are ways you could build those kinds of experiences in a lot more often and maybe not even make them like they're just kind of a satellite onto the thing. Like there's also a playground underneath Splash Mountain, I think. I just remembered this. We didn't really spend a lot of time on it, but just like hide a playground in a ride and then it's there when you need to have it, but it doesn't have to be the big like Mondo attraction.
I almost forget about that because it's such a small little thing, the Splash Mountain playground. But they've started doing that more. Like Peter Pan, their queue has interactive elements to it, but I've never actually done it because I'm like, well, I'm not going to wait an hour just to do this queue. I'm going to use a fast pass. Or they have it at Seven Dwarfs Mine Train, same deal. I'm like, I'm not going to wait in that line for my kids for 2 hours. So they've tried to do it, but like you said, they're putting it in the middle. Haunted Mansion has a really cool thing if you wait in the standby line with all kinds of stuff to press and everything. There are things, but I agree that it's different. I just wondered too, I mean, Universal has gotten more popular with Harry Potter and everything, but like you mentioned, people are kind of congregating at the Diagon Alley or even Transformers, Spider-Man, whatever. Are there still enough places like that in some of the Disney parks? I mean, now I'm not talking about things they put in, But is part of it just a symptom of the fact that they just draw too many people? I mean, can they? I mean, I know there are things they can do with capacity and adding rides, but is it almost like they're a victim of their own success in a way?
I think it's a good point. And even in the 13 years since the first time I visited Disney World, it really has felt like every time we go back, it gets crazier. And I mean, the first time we went, we kind of scientifically broke down like what are the busiest times of year. We will go in the middle of the week during the least busy times. So it is not an apples to apples comparison because now we're also bringing my nieces who are 8 and 12, and they have to go when they are not in school. And we're now in the phase, the next time we go, we have to wait until there's no school. So we're going, in June during the school holidays and sometimes not in the middle of the week. So I guess I'm kind of going from the worst to the best of crowds to the worst of crowds. And some of that is on me, but it does seem like over time it has gotten like more and more people are in there and there's fewer things that are not the big crowd draws. And like even the fun stuff, like I live for the little tiny stuff. I love the random things that nobody else does, like Enchanted Tiki Room, another favorite of mine. I would do those kinds of things all the time, and I wouldn't even miss like Space Mountain. I think literally the first time I went to Magic Kingdom, I went on Space Mountain once and then have not been on it since.
Well, that's interesting. You would have loved the parks in like 1988 or something.
Yeah.
You now, though. I don't know if you would have liked it in 1988, but you know what I mean? Because
I would have liked it in 1988.
Epcot especially, they had, I mean, I don't know how much you know about this, but they had Kitchen Cabaret with the singing about food. They had the Journey to Imagination was 10 million times different and better. There were so many things like that there. It's like the whole park was basically, I call it like nerdy Walt Disney World. And I mean that in like the best way possible, where now, yes, they have Star Wars Galaxy's Edge and they're going to take you on the Millennium Falcon and through. And I'm like, that's amazing. I would love to do that. But it's a lot. It's actually more like a lot of Universal rides where it's like, I mean, I'm talking Universal like Spider-Man, Hulk, Men in Black, where it's like, it's in your face. It's there. And I think both of them have gotten that way, and it's hard to find. Now, I have a question for you, though, on a kind of related note, though, because I know you're making the point that Universal is better, especially for your kid right now. Do you think part of that is because so many people like me and adults that went as kids have this nostalgia for Disney when they went as a kid, and now I'm going to take my kids and they're going to do all that. Do you think part of it you don't have that because you didn't go until you were 26? That maybe, I mean, this is not a negative for you, but that you're looking at it differently, more pragmatically, and not as much like, I want my kid to meet Mickey or ride Space Mountain or ride Dumbo because I did that when I was young.
I think that's a really fair point. I certainly was obsessed with all things Disney from a tiny age. And I think there is this part of me that's really steeped in the lore and loves the park, but I don't have that same connection to it that somebody that visited as a child would have, just because I didn't have that experience. And I don't necessarily, I think it's a plus, honestly, because I go in now. If I take my kid to a theme park, I'm bringing him in with no expectations at all of what we're going to do. And going as an adult without kids, which I've done many more times than I have with kids, I would get the touring plan and I would need to see everything and do everything and like maximize my experience. And when I bring my son, it's just like, we can't do everything. We're not going to do everything. So we're going to do the things that he wants to do. And he doesn't have to have the same experience that I would have had without him. And I don't necessarily need to have him replicate my childhood memories because they're not there. So I think it's a really good point. But it's also, I think it doesn't make him immune to like his mom being obsessed with all things Disney lore and needing to like drill that into him, because he's certainly going to get plenty of that as he gets older.
Right. Yeah. Because he's still fairly young. Even when he's like 6, 7, 8, it's a very different situation. It doesn't mean that he's not going to love Universal. It's just it's a different setup there. But the interesting thing now, I think, too, just is that I almost feel like they're the two places are flipping a bit because like did you go on Hagrid's? I doubt you did while you
Oh
were there,
God,
right?
no. There was a 12-hour wait for it, and it was raining sporadically because that's what Orlando does in the summertime. Like every day at 4 o'clock, it pours rain for 20 minutes and then it stops. So they shut down the whole ride a couple of times, and people just waited it out. I think anybody that was there to ride Hagrid, that was the one thing they did all day. So no, I did not. I have been on all of the other Harry Potter attractions though, and I did that on a day when I didn't have my son with me. We've been back a few times.
Yeah, the only reason I asked, I didn't think you did, but I asked because Hagrid's is like Universal has always had this reputation as they have a lot of screens, and it's partially true. Even like Gringotts at Harry Potter is all basically mostly screens, and so they have a lot of that. But then you have Hagrid's, which has all these sets, and it's like actually a coaster where you go by animatronics and stuff. And then you have Disney has had some recent attractions like Flight of Passage, which I think is awesome, but where you're looking at a screen, or they're doing a new Mickey and Minnie ride where you look at screens. It's weird to me because I'm like, wait, which one is which? Now, how is this working? So there's so much back and forth where it's like the distinguishing factors between the two are so not as much there. So then things like being able to walk on the front of the line or having playgrounds and stuff even gets more exacerbated because the headliners, while different, feel a little more similar than they used to, it seems like.
It's true. And I think the thing you want to ask yourself is if you go to Magic Kingdom and you go to either Universal Studios Prime or Islands of Adventure, and you were in there and somebody imposed a rule on you that you could not do any of the headliner activities, which place are you going to have a better time?
That's a good question. Now, the question is, though, if you're at Universal Studios and they did that, does that mean I have to spend the day riding Jimmy Fallon and Fast and the Furious and all that?
Jimmy Fallon is like the hottest ticket in that place. I was shocked. I've never actually been on it. The funny thing is about Universal Studios Prime is I've never been at a park where there were more moments of random magic. And, that's kind of the thing that Disney is always selling. Like you go there and you'll have this magical experience. And I can tell you about times when I've kind of been there and experienced that. But at Universal Studios Prime, the thing that I pictured in my head that theme parks were like, you really get that. Like there's just something fun. Like you just kind of turn around, you don't really know where you're going, and you run into something that's super cool and super fun. Or like there are live musical and dance performances going on, like 3 at a time all over the park. And that was really fun. When we went there, my son, I think he was about a year and a half old, and he sat in front of the Beat Builders, and it was the greatest thing he'd ever seen. And then if you're not at the age where you care which fuzzy giant characters you meet, you will meet a dozen of them at Universal Studios. And if your kid's into that, if he's not terrified of it, which mine was not, mine was very much into it, just like, oh, I've never seen Kung Fu Panda. I don't know who the F Kung Fu Panda is, but he's big and he wants to give me a hug, and I'm going to give him a hug. And we had dozens of those experiences across Universal. And that was just that was how I thought theme parks were when I was a kid. Like you just walk through the gates, and there'd be a ride over here and a ride over here, and then like some costumed character would run up to greet you. And at Disney, of course, that's not true. The costumed character lives in a hut, and you wait 30 minutes to get a picture with them, and that's it. That's other thing that I think if you go to Magic Kingdom, sometimes if it's very, very crowded, they bring out extra characters, and you might have that interaction, but Universal really bakes it in.
Well, yeah, and you're describing, though, it was at one point like that at the Magic Kingdom, because I even see some old home videos, like really old. We're talking like when I was 5 years old or something in the early 80s. And I'm like, we're just walking around and there's Pooh and Tigger. And they look really weird because it's like early Pooh and Tigger. And you're like, what are they doing? And they're just hanging out. And we're like, I guess we'll take a picture with them. And granted, there is some kind of appearing better. Like, I don't remember the fact that when I complain about Fast Pass now, I don't remember the fact that I probably waited in line for a really long time for things when I was a kid, because you're a kid and you're just like, oh yeah, we're here, whatever. The parents are probably losing their mind in the heat or whatever, but it is easy to look back. But that was totally true. It was very different. And like I mentioned with things like Mr. Toad and everything, there were also just a lot of things to do. And there still are now. Like they've added a bunch of recent attractions, but they've added things like, I don't know if you're familiar at all with the Rise of the Resistance boarding group situation that they have going on there, where basically you have to be into the park before it opens and then get out your phone. And if you're lucky, if you get on within the first minute or two, you might get to ride the attraction. Now, granted, part of it is the attraction keeps breaking down, but we're going to go to California this summer, and I am like losing my mind over that. I'm like, how are we going to get into the park? My kids don't like to get up early. Should I not even bother? It's like, and they know about it though. They're too old now. You can't just say, oh, it's not working or whatever. So there's that where, granted, Universal has things you got to rush to on busy days if you want to ride all the Potter rides, or like you mentioned with Hagrid's. It's not like that. Hagrid's had terrible opening, but it's interesting to me. Some of it, which I've tried to learn as having kids, is, if we go to the Animal Kingdom and they don't ride Everest, it's still going to be there. That's okay. And that's a tough thing to learn though. Like you mentioned with the touring plans, I'm like a meticulous planner. It's made me pull back when I've gone with kids because we just can't.
Yeah, it really changes your expectations of what a good day at the park looks like. And for me, that was a hard adjustment, but it's also, we're kind of coming back around to it a little bit. And I think someday we'll be back in that space again. It's going to be a long way off, but we did actually, last June, we got to Epcot the second it opened, and we did the rope drop for the Frozen ride. We got right on it. There was no wait, and everybody was delighted. It was like, this was the one thing we came for. So the rest of the day, it's like everything else is frosting.
Yeah, that's true. And that's probably what we're going to do in California, assuming we go, barring who knows what happening in the world. But, we're going to stay happy. We're just going to think about happy things. But really, we're going to try and just one day, and granted, we can always just go back to sleep after that. So
sure.
It's okay.
Sure.
But just to get to your point, though, I think about some of my favorite days that I've gone to recently. I mean, I'm thinking mostly Disney, but the Animal Kingdom, when you go with a kid, this is the thing you kind of mentioned that I hadn't really hit on. It slows you down so much. Like, I used to be at that park and be like, oh, there's not that much to do. This is before Pandora. There aren't that many attractions. And going with a kid in a stroller and walking around walking trails and having to just stand in one place for a while, I was like, this park's amazing. This is great. I just stand here and look around. It's like somehow that forces you. I don't know if you notice this, when you have to like push a stroller and stop and feed them and everything, it forces you to actually look around and go, there's a lot of weird, crazy stuff here. And I'm sure that's happened to you at Universal too.
Yeah, well, I think this is why hidden Mickeys were invented.
Oh,
it's
totally.
Like if you are like having a child that you have to tote around the park and it's getting stultifying, you can just look around and find the magic.
Yeah, and that's the thing, where things you would notice, or even now in the days of front of the line or fast pass or whatever, you would notice those just standing in line being bored, which I mean, there was some of that when I was younger. I'm sure where you hear the same music cue that's 30 seconds and it goes over and over. And I try and explain that to my daughters a lot, and they're like, what? You just like stood there? I was like, yes, that's what we did.
You didn't even have your phone.
No, now I'm like, man, that would be rough. But that's the case with a lot of things. So are you familiar at all with the upcoming, terribly named new park, Universal's Epic Universe that's coming?
I have heard bits and pieces, but it's kind of, I'm not exactly the target demographic, and my child is also not the target demographic. So I just like, when I hear about new Universal parks opening, I'm like, oh, good. That'll siphon off some of the crowds so we can go back and enjoy the old stuff.
Well, think about this, though, because it's supposed to open around, they have it 2023. So that's like 3 years or so. And they're going to have a Nintendo World there, which I assume will have things that when your son is 3 years older or whatever, he may enjoy. So to me, I look at that. I mean, they probably are going to have another Harry Potter land and maybe How to Train Your Dragon, which again, when he's 8 or 10 or whatever, might be more interesting. So I'm wondering about, because we have not had a new Universal or Disney park in Orlando since, I guess, Islands of Adventure, Animal Kingdom were around the same era, 98, 99-ish. It's been a long time. So this seems to me that your son is going to go right into the right age for some things there. So I'm kind of excited to see just an entirely new park, and what's that going to do to everything, Universal versus Disney, the whole deal, given that they're going to open something entirely from scratch.
it'll be interesting to see if it just like compounds the insane crowds issue or if having another park just kind of evens things out a little bit. Like I think Harry Potter World certainly had that effect on Universal. Like all of a sudden you could go and ride on the Spider-Man and Transformers rides all you wanted.
Yeah, and it's interesting. Before, like, I went a few years, this is before we had kids, a few years before Harry Potter opened, and those parks were like a ghost town, though. I mean, this was not in June. This was in January when it was 50 degrees. And I just remember riding like Jurassic Park, and there was two of us on the ride, which is bad when the giant splash comes because there's nobody to block it, as I learned. But, it was just nuts. And so we went to Disney in like 2005, and this was again kind of post 9/11 and everything, and there was nobody there. So I think it's just the popularity and the ease of travel and everything. I mean, the economy for now booming since like 2008. It's just crazy. But yeah, I don't know. It does seem like, Disney's adding Guardians of the Galaxy, and they're adding Ratatouille, and they're adding Tron, and Universal added all these things. I don't know if any of us can afford it, but they're all doing it. They just keep moving forward. It's crazy.
Well, I think that's the next question, Dan. Do you think there's a bubble? Is the bubble going to burst?
I think it would take, I think we're going to, I don't want to get too real world, but it has to come up. I think we're going to see it. It'll burst if people stop traveling. Because already I've heard stories of a lot of people canceling trips to Anaheim because California's already had reports of some of the coronavirus. And I know it's only been a few, but really, and Disney's already closed. Shanghai is closed right now. Tokyo is closed. Hong Kong is closed. I think they're going to reopen a few of those soon in March. But if they have to close one of their U.S. resorts, I think that would take them years to recover. I think it would be a while. And granted, not getting that dire, a big recession would do the same thing. And I think they've built them up so much and they've invested so much money. It's not like, after 9/11, they just stopped building new things for a few years, but they hadn't built a few new things a few years before that. This is like, it's crazy because, it could drop fast, especially if people stop traveling internationally, because January, February, it's like 60%, it feels like, guests from other countries. It's crazy.
Yeah, I suspect that some of these plans to unveil new things may be a little bit ambitious in light of that. And of course, some of the Disney parks were envisioned as like whole other extra parks and then ended up just being like an extra land because you had to scale back quite a bit. And, the reverse has been true as well.
Right. And I think that's where they're very antsy about building. Like people say, well, it's so crowded. Why don't they build a fifth park? I think that they'd be a little hesitant because it's going to cost. They spent over $1 billion on each version of Galaxy's Edge, at least from what I heard, the Star Wars lands, to build an entirely new park. Like, I don't know what Universal's spending. They seem to somehow find ways to not spend as much, but still you're talking multiple $1 billion of investment. And like you said, you got to plan it out. Who knows? 3-5 years. I hate to be too negative here. I think that, obviously it's great that they're drawing those big crowds for them. It might not be great for me as a guest, but it's great for them. But just the last month or two of just world news is showing that, the Olympics might get canceled. It's showing that crazy things can happen.
Yeah, it's really hard to predict the future. And, I don't want to get too far down this rabbit hole, but yeah. My day job is in a different sector of the travel industry, and we have had some of these hard conversations where we're getting a lot of cancellations on our trips, and there's been questions of, are we going to have to start canceling voyages? Already they had an ambitious plan to expand travel in one of the areas that we've then had to just cancel it altogether because we know that the demand's not going to be there.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I think the last thing, like somewhere like Walt Disney World is probably, I spoke a little dire there, but is more recession proof or to the issues you're describing than some places because it's just so popular and it draws so many people. And especially Disneyland draws so many locals that they can kind of get around that. But it is interesting just given just the growth. You don't see it every year, but you're seeing apparently this January and February, I heard a lot of reports. It was like Disney World was like the busiest people have ever been there and seen it. And part of that is holidays and just, there was the way dates fell was kind of weird, but what happens if they're assuming, and they're having their 50th anniversary of Walt Disney World is in 2021. And I know they're assuming they're going to get an even bigger bump of attendance. I don't want to be negative and dire and say, well, what happens if it doesn't? But I say it'd be interesting. I don't really want that to happen. I don't want the economy to take. I don't want there to be.
Nobody wants that.
Yeah, but it's still an interesting topic just because it is getting so busy. And even Universal right now is, to flip it a little bit more in the parks, is building. They have not announced it, but this is how they do things. They don't announce things. And then like all of a sudden they're like, it's going to open in 6 months. You're like, wow, they're so much faster than Disney. I don't understand. They did this with King Kong. It was like everyone knew it was there and they'd never like announced it till like the year before. But they're doing Jurassic Park roller coaster is going to be coming in a few years from what I've heard. And they just keep on with the new park, and then they're building new resorts and new water parks. So it's almost like they are where Disney was like 20 years ago in the 1990s, where they're just building. And I hope they continue to do that because it also pushes Disney, because I don't think we would have a Star Wars Galaxy's Edge on the level we do if there was no Wizarding World of Harry Potter before it. Or Pandora, same deal, regardless of if you kind of scratch your head and say Avatar. But that land is really cool. It's because Disney was like, oh, shoot, we have to compete. And that's good for all of us.
Yeah, it is. I think it's iron sharpens iron here. Like every time one of the parks rolls out something cool, the other one feels like they have to top it. And I think that keeps it really fresh and exciting. But one thing I wondered about, Dan, and maybe you have the answer to this, like this might be just a factual thing rather than us like giving our opinions here, but when at the time that Universal Studios built Islands of Adventure and built this whole area around the Marvel characters, Disney did not own Marvel. And now there's kind of this interesting intellectual property exercise where you are walking through a park that's not Disney owned, then you're looking at all of these Disney characters that at some point I would imagine that's going to lapse, and all of the rides at Universal will have to, like, maybe they'll just expand the comic strip land or something like that. But I think like there's probably been a kibosh put on like them expanding any more Marvel things at their park.
Here's the interesting thing about that. It's that Universal has the rights west of the Mississippi to certain characters, the like Spider, all the Avengers and all that, in perpetuity. They don't ever lapse. So it's weird where now you have a case where not only are the movies there, but Disney's going to have a Spider-Man ride in California, and there's going to be a Spider-Man ride at Universal in Florida. And granted, it would take a lot for Disney to top Spider-Man at Universal, which is awesome. One of the best rides I've ever ridden in my life still, but it's weird. So that's why Guardians of the Galaxy is having a giant coaster at Epcot, because I don't know why it's at Epcot, but that's why they're adding Guardians of the Galaxy to Walt Disney World, because they're not blocked, but they're blocked from Iron Man, the Hulk, Spider-Man. I don't think they can even use Black Panther because he's also in that group. There's like a group that none of the Avengers basically. So there's always been rumors that, I'm sorry, I don't want to turn this into a big me explain something here, but
no, I asked you to explain it.
But no, there's rumors for years that Disney was going to make some sort of trade with Universal. Like there was a point once where they traded the rights to Al Michaels for the rights to Oswald the Rabbit, because Disney, which is the strangest thing I've ever heard. So then he could be on NBC's football as opposed to ABC and stuff. It's ridiculous, but it won't be that silly, but there may be some point. But I think right now, in a way, the popularity of the Marvel movies maybe kind of helps Universal. It might not be so bad, because then people go, oh, Spider-Man. And not everyone who goes to every park thinks, well, wait, Marvel's Disney. Wait, they're just like, hey, this is great. So I don't know. Maybe you would think that at some point they will do it. But I think Universal is going to be pretty tough, because in a way, they don't gain as much as Disney. If Disney's able to just start putting all these Marvel attractions with the most famous characters in their parks in Florida, that doesn't really help Universal. They only lose. I don't know what they'd have to get out of it.
Yeah, it's a fair point. It's interesting. I didn't realize that anybody would even let them sign a deal in perpetuity. That's a pretty sweet thing, and especially it's interesting to me, like the characters that Universal gloms onto. Like they have like several large flagship properties that people care about, and then they build the rest of their park around like they went to somebody's garage sale and scooped up the bargain basement character rights. Like an American Tail came out when I was a young child, and they still have Fievel stuff. They still have Barney stuff, and any kid that grew up with Barney is like out of grad school at this point. And of course, the most emblematic of this is the Islands of Adventure Toon Universe, which is characters from the comic strips and the Sunday funnies, most of which I don't even remember. And I had a pretty big obsession for this kind of thing. It's like, oh, there's Marmaduke. Oh, here's Andy Cap. Like, I don't think anybody my parents' age actually even cares about this stuff, but it's so strange that they built a whole area of their park around it. And I think on some level, Universal is kind of saying with this, well, it doesn't actually, we can get a couple of big properties, and then the rest of the park, it doesn't actually matter what it's built around. As long as it's something like remotely cool that people want to be in, it doesn't have to be an instantly recognizable A-list property.
What about Dudley Do-Right? I mean, come on. Everybody knows him, right?
I mean, that's a great ride.
I got so soaked on that ride.
Yeah,
when I went
that is
on
the
it.
wettest ride in Florida.
It was 60 degrees and somebody spent like a quarter and shot me with the water cannons. And I was so mad. I have a picture. I have never been that soaked on anything, like anything beyond jumping in a pool in my life. But to get to your point, that section is constantly like when people talk about Lord of the Rings. I mean, I don't know. This is not a real rumor. This is just talk. But everyone's like, well, can't they just get rid of that Toon area? And they could somehow theme the Popeye ride to something to do with Lord of the Rings. There's like all these weird things. Because I remember my wife walking that area going like, what is this? Like, why is this here? So that's the thing that makes the park so weird. But in a way, when I talk about nerdy, dorky, weird stuff that I remember from when I was a kid, that all really qualifies. And I do think and go for the biggest properties and the big headliners. I mean, those things, just the fact that those rides the Dudley Do ride is still the theme of that log flume now, 20 plus years when that park opened. It's incredible to me. It's like, yeah, it's basically just a log flume and everything else doesn't really matter.
Yeah, as long as it's a cool enough ride. And like the same thing, my kid doesn't really care who Popeye is, but he spent 2 hours exploring every corner of that ship.
Yeah, and I should say, though, I mean, Splash Mountain, for example, to go at Disney, is themed to Song of the South, and nobody cares. My kids have never seen Song of the South. I'm not going to show that, but they love that ride.
Don't. That movie does not hold up.
No. So it's a good point. I'm picking on Universal, but really it's like Splash Mountain. You've got like singing animals and drops and animatronics, and it's fun, and it's like, okay, that's all you really need in a way. You don't have to spend. It doesn't have to be. And I say this, I went to Galaxy's Edge for a short time and it's awesome. But man, they spent a lot of money on that. I mean, they spent a lot of time and, I'm a Star Wars fan. Are you a Star Wars fan at all?
Oh, I love Star Wars. Are you kidding me? I'm like super into Star Wars, and I look forward to going to Galaxy's Edge in 8 years when the new hotness is drawing all the crowds away and my son is old enough to appreciate it.
Well, we're starting to get that way with Pandora. But no, I only asked because I was just curious, not as much had you been there, but just the question is, would you cry if you saw the Millennium Falcon? That's the big question.
If it was a good replica of the Millennium Falcon, I would be prepared to, yes.
Great. Okay, well, I have a few at the end. We could do some quick rapid fire. But before we do that, I just want to make sure, has there any other point as far as Universal that you feel like we haven't really nailed that you want to make at this point? Because this has been really fun. I've had a few shows about Universal with Seth Guberski, as a guy who covers Universal, and I want to have him on again, but I feel like I really need to go back and hit everything new they've done before I become an expert on it. So this has been good. This is helpful.
Yeah, I mean, I hope it's helpful. It's been a few years since I've like really done the deep dive into it. I think we went it was probably 2 years ago we went, and my son was small enough that his grandmother could watch him for the day while we went and did all of the Harry Potter stuff, and like we got the park hopper pass and did absolutely everything that you could possibly do in a day. And the interesting, I think that would be probably the last thing I'd want to mention is you can get a park hopper pass that lets you go to both Universal Studios and Islands of Adventure. And the only reason I would ever recommend that somebody do this, because you can't see everything on these parks in one day, especially if it's a very crowded day. The only reason to do it is because there's one ride you cannot ride unless you have this pass, and it's the Hogwarts Express. And that is worth doing one time. If you can swing it, do that one time and never get the park hopper pass again.
That is such a brilliant move from Universal to basically put something really cool that everybody's going to want to do and be like, by the way, you have to buy the ticket that's $170 for that or something. It's not dumb. It's a very smart move. And I say this knowing what they're doing, and I'm like, oh yeah. I'd pay that. Yeah, I'm going to do it. I'm not going to not ride that and not do it. Plus, if we were there for a whole weekend, I'd still probably do it though. They got me. They have me, Jess.
Yeah, they definitely, and we've done the park hopper twice, and once with my son and once without. And when we were with my son, he was far too young to understand anything about Harry Potter, but he would have ridden the Hogwarts Express back and forth all day. It was a train. That's all he needed.
They're like, we did all these really cool things with effects that makes it look like. He's like, oh, it's just a train. It's cool. I don't need all the effects. I just want the train. That's all I want. Which they do have at Disney. They have trains, so he can. They
do have trains there, yes.
Though actually, the one in Florida is closed right now because they're putting in Tron, so that will not be good for a while.
Yeah, well, they only have to change. They have to take out 2 letters and put in another letter, and then the train becomes Tron.
Okay. All right. Well, I want to finish with some just random questions. Are you game for some random questions that may be a little stupid?
My favorite kind of questions are random questions.
Okay. So in the spirit of Survivor, if you looked at Universal and someone said, you must vote out one of these 3 attractions from the parks, it's removed, and I'm not going to give you the most obvious ones. You can't remove Fast and Furious. That's not fair, which I haven't ridden, but I've heard it's terrible. So if you had to remove one of these, would you remove 1, E.T., 2, The Cat in the Hat, or 3, One Fish, Two Fish, Red Fish, Blue Fish?
Oh gosh, that is hard. That is really hard because we didn't really talk about E.T. yet. And I think it is worth noting that E.T. I think comes the closest to a Magic Kingdom style ride because all of the effects inside it are practical. And there is this kind of, it's not very related to the movie at all. It's just kind of demented and weird in this very old school kind of way. And it's that kind of theme parky thing that I think I'm trying to capture from a childhood where I didn't really get very many theme parks. So that's a really tough one. I will say I would vote out Cat in the Hat, I think, probably because I've been on it more times than any other person will ever need to experience in their life. And I feel like I know every corner of that ride. And I do have to be honest, the last time we were there, the last time we went on it, it is showing its age. It needs a refresh. It at least needs a fresh coat of paint because there are points where like the practical effects jump up and like the cat's face is faded, and it seems like they need to take it out of commission and at least like touch up the cat's face.
Yeah, I think that's right. I do want to mention E.T. We should have talked about that. I love E.T. The scenes on the alien planet are so weird. I love it so much.
So messed up.
Also, I have to mention the thank you, Dan. Thank you, Jess. That amazed me when I was a kid. I was like, why do they need my name? I don't understand. And they still do it, and it's still amazing. I love it.
Yeah, I do too. And I think I hope that is still around when my son is old enough to ride it. I think we got at least probably 2 more years before he's going to be able to do it, and I want it to still be there because it is in a park that has that reputation for like everything being high tech and screen based. This is like the most old school practical effecty thing you have in, I think, maybe any park in Orlando.
Yeah, I actually went to, this is not going rapid fire at all, and I keep talking. This is always how it goes. I actually went to Universal when I was like, I don't know, I don't remember the exact year. It had just opened, and they still had, I mean, they had Jaws, and they had King Kong, the original King Kong, Kongfrontation, which was incredible. Back to the Future, all these E.T., all these things, and the only one of all those that is left is E.T. And there were rumors that originally that Nintendo was going to go in that corner where they have like a kid's coaster, like Curious George stuff. I don't even know. I have never really been up there, and people were really nervous about E.T. Now I don't think that's going to happen, so I think Barney gets to hang out for a while longer. But I was really nervous because I think that attraction is, you riding the bikes. It's all so strange. But okay, well, let's continue, Jess. We must continue.
Although I do have to say that Curious George area, fantastic if you have a really little kid. Like, it's the best little kid attraction in all of Orlando. Okay, now.
Oh, I missed it already. My kids are too old now. I got to take Etta right now. That's it.
Yeah, I think they would both still enjoy it because there's enough there. Like, you get wet and you can like throw foam balls at each other. It is really a lot of fun at any age, but especially for very little kids.
Well, that's all it really takes. You can throw a ball and get wet. You could do that in our backyard and people be loving it. Okay, we're gonna do the same game with Disney. We're going to just go to Epcot, though, with some lesser attractions at Epcot here to find out.
Oh, it's going to be tough.
Find out which one you like the least. Okay. Seas with Nemo and Friends, Journey into Imagination with Figment, and the Grand Fiesta Tour starring the Three Caballeros. I'm assuming you've ridden these attractions. If not, I will replace one. But which one would you remove?
I mean, I will be honest, I do not love the refurb on Grand Fiesta. It was much better before it was so screeny.
Yes.
But I will tell you, I have a personal beef with the Seas with Nemo and Friends. Because the very first time I rode on it, it broke down. And we were trapped on it for about 20 minutes, watching the same little piece over and over. And then eventually the ride started up abruptly, and we didn't get to see how the story finished. So I'm going to kill that one.
I really don't like that attraction. I've ridden it enough, and it's always really hot in there, and it's just like, and they have this amazing aquarium, and they block it off with like some really weird scenes, and it's, I used to like it more, and now I'm just like, we can just skip that. I don't think we even rode it the last time. But
I mean, the greatest thing about that ride is the way you get on board with the conveyor belt in the little seashell car. Mm-hmm. And they have that on a lot of rides.
Oh, yeah. That's the kind of typical. Well, that's like similar. They used to have, before they had Nemo, it's totally different. But they had just like you got to go through the aquarium. But I guess there were no characters. So, okay, let's get a little more positive here.
Okay.
What is your favorite place to eat at Walt Disney World?
I think it is, and I'm going to get the name wrong, so I apologize. It's the Pecos Bills Tex-Mex area because they have these fried cauliflower tacos that are fantastic. And I love the Disney food. I love the Dole Whip, and I love the Mickey bars. And I've actually never had a bad meal at Disney. And there's some like really wretched things I suppose I could be ordering, but I would eat those cauliflower tacos like not at a theme park. I would order them from a regular restaurant. They're that good. And I like that area has a bar of fixins. So you get your like naked tacos, and then you could put whatever you want on them. You kind of have this unlimited options to decorate your meal with.
Yeah, that's a popular place. I haven't eaten there as much, but I know it's very well liked among fans. Okay, very important question. Who are you rooting for to win Survivor Winners at War?
Oh, that's the hardest question yet, Dan. I will say I am participating, and I think anybody that has listened to me speak on a podcast any time in the last month knows this, but I bought into a very high-stakes Survivor pool with some of my colleagues at Primetimer and other members of the Survivor press and a few former contestants. And the prize is somewhere around like $500 or $600. So if I win this, I'm doing pretty well. And right now I'm sitting in second place as of episode 3. But the 5 people that I picked for my team are Denise, Kim, Sophie, Wendell, and Yul. So if any one of the 5 of them wins, I will be happy.
Yeah, you've knocked out a few. I don't know. I can't say one person because I'm so torn. Like Sophie and Yule are up there for me as far as who I want to do well.
Ravenclaws.
Then there's people that I look that I look at and I'm like, but man, wouldn't it be fun if Tony was just around the whole time? Can't he just hang out and be there? And then there's people I really just like Wendell and Jeremy and people like that I just am like, they're not. I like watching them on my screen. So, of course, that's how it was for Ethan.
Yeah.
All right, but I didn't watch tonight. So we're recording this. I'm not spoiling something. By the time this goes out, people we're mentioning might be voted out or hanging out on edge of extinction. All right, a couple more, and then we will finish here. First, I want to ask you, what is the most overrated for you popular attraction, like headliner top attraction at Walt Disney World?
Oh, that is a rough one because I've never actually, like, a lot of them I just kind of don't go on because I'm not going to wait in line for an hour for them. So I think with a lot of them, it's like I haven't even been there yet. But I feel like it's probably not fair of me to say that I think the Avatar ride is overrated because I didn't actually bother with it. But I would think that is probably my answer because why is that even? And we spent a lot of time this hour talking about how these theme parks have this magical ability to take an intellectual property that nobody cares about anymore and spin it into something really cool. And like the walking around area there is fine, but I can't imagine there's anything in there that's going to make me love Avatar.
I will say, I don't know if you're not going to love Avatar from it. But I did not ride Flight of Passage. There's a boat ride, Navi River Journey is fun. But I did not ride Flight of Passage until last September. And that was one reason I was just there for a really short time. And I was kind of like, oh, what's it going to be? Just staring at a screen. And it's like Soarin', which I like Soarin'. But, and then I get on it and I'm just like, I was blown away by it. And it's really, you're on in front of a screen, But somehow the way they do that, you come out of it and I was just like, I totally get why people wait 4 hours for this. I never would have gotten it because I would think I wouldn't wait 4 hours for anything, and I'm not sure I would because I had a fast pass, so that might have had something to do with it. But I was blown away. So I would say...
Okay. I will take that back. I will change my answer. I've got a new answer.
I'm not trying to contradict you. I'm just saying... No.
I'll give it a chance.
It's pretty awesome, at least as my first ride. It was awesome.
All right. So here's my actual answer then of things I myself have experienced. And this is a hot take, so... When you said rides where you see stuff on a screen, I'm like, oh, wait, I kind of blocked this out because I was so underwhelmed by it. So everybody's going to be adding me en masse here. Toy Story Midway Mania, overrated.
I don't disagree there. Really, to me, I feel like now it's okay because it's not so popular. But when it was the attraction, I want to hear you explain it more. But I'm not going to argue with that one. I think when it was the most popular attraction in the park, I was like, no. But go on.
Yeah.
Proceed.
Well, it's basically you sit in a car and you play Nintendo for 5 minutes after you've waited in line for 2 hours. And honestly, there is something to be said for rides that have that interactive element where you're on a mission and you're doing things that actually have some sort of effect. But they've already have a ride like this at Disney World that's better than this, and it's even a Toy Story ride. So I don't understand why it's like Diet Buzz Lightyear's Astro Blasters, where you don't actually have any concrete things, you just have a screen. It was just, I was like, this is the hot attraction, because at the time we wrote it, it was the hot attraction. Like, I can't believe this is the thing people are waiting in line for hours and hours for.
I feel like I'm just setting you up to make people mad. I'm really not trying to do that here. I'm not just trying. It's like I'm throwing up the basketball or something here. It just
look, I regularly deal with the wrath of people when I get things wrong on a Star Trek podcast, so I'm pretty sure I'm prepped for this.
Well, I am sure. Listeners, be kind. We're just having fun here on the podcast, I will say. But really, I don't think you're going to get as much flack for that, because I think the general consensus now is kind of, because like I mentioned the Spider-Man attraction, what that appears to be, I'm sure it'll be more high tech, is you sit and you shoot webs at a screen and you move the thing moves, but a lot of that sounds a lot like a more high tech version of Toy Story Mania. And when a lot of Disney fans heard this, everybody kind of went, oh. So I don't know if you're gonna get as much flack there now on Toy Story Mania. Okay, two more, real quick.
Two more.
Which of these is the most ridiculous phenomenon at Walt Disney World? Number 1, turkey legs. Number 2, themed popcorn buckets. You could also insert themed French fry buckets. There's a lot of things like this. Or number 3, themed walls that people stand in front of just for Instagram. Which of these would it be?
Well, themed walls are a ridiculous concept, and I will give it that, but they are definitely not endemic to Disney World. You can go to any mall in the United States right now, and half of the shuttered storefronts are now theme walls. Like, this is our local mall. They have a whole wall of flippy sequins, and it's like the most fun. You can play with it and like draw a picture and take your selfie in front of it. Yeah, I will say I think the most ridiculous thing is the turkey leg, because it is not good. It is not something like I could see you ordering it at a Renaissance fair, but why are you ordering it in Tomorrowland? And we got them one time, and it's just like it's way too much meat. There's nothing else. It's one flavor. And then there's like little pieces of tendons and stuff that you keep running into as you eat your way to the center of the turkey leg, and it really throws off your game. So I think if I was getting rid of one of these, themed popcorn buckets, whatever, you get a little plastic souvenir, you can take it to the beach later. I'm fine with that. But yeah, get rid of the turkey leg.
That's funny. I almost wrote that question just so you could pick the walls, and so you picked turkey leg, and I'm like, whoa.
Yeah, I thought you were setting me up to pop off about the turkey leg, because
No,
I literally have like half an hour of material on the turkey leg.
I think it's great. I really don't set them up I just make assumptions about what's going to be picked. So I just thought it was funny. Okay, last one.
Yeah. Okay.
We'll end on a high note.
Okay.
What is your favorite attraction at the Universal Orlando Resort?
My favorite attraction at the Universal Orlando Resort, I'm honestly going to say, I think it is the Beat Builders. And I know that's weird. It's not a ride. It's not a thing you have to wait in line for. But it's just such a random piece of magic that you're not expecting, because if you walk by it at the right time, it just looks like there's dudes doing work on scaffolding. And then all of a sudden it erupts into this percussive performance that you can hear throughout the entire park. And it really is magical. Like I will stop whatever I'm doing and watch it every time it comes on.
Yeah, I know nothing about the Beat Builders, actually. I do like the description that I just read, which is a quartet of beefy guys who hang out on the scaffolding outside the restaurant. Wow.
You got me. That's why I really like it.
I just thought it was funny, the description that I just pulled up, because I was like, I don't know anything about this. So that's good. I like that. That is interesting and unique than just Harry Potter and the Forbidden Journey, which I think is amazing, but still.
Yeah. I love E.T. I love the Simpsons area. I obviously love the Harry Potter stuff, but for just like the kind of, it just ushers you in to the right mindset to experience the park, is to have this erupt around you while you're walking by it. It's so much fun. And I think literally any age can appreciate it too.
Yeah, totally. And I think that perfectly fits with kind of your whole points about Universal. So it's a perfect way to end. So Jess, this has been really fun, but I know that you are on other podcasts and doing so much more. So if listeners want to hear you on other shows or catch up with you online, where should they go?
Well, I think if you are a fan of either Star Trek or The Walking Dead, and I know the overlap is probably more than I think it is. I am covering Star Trek Picard with the wonderful Mike Bloom over on postshowrecaps.com, and I also cover The Walking Dead with Josh Wigler, and we're going to be also covering the new spin-off Walking Dead series that's starting up right after the regular Walking Dead finishes up. So plenty of things happening there, probably getting us right up until the time Amazing Race Canada starts up. If it's even happening this year, Dan, who knows what's happening. I hope it is, though. And you, of course, can follow me on Twitter at HaymakerHattie.
Excellent. I hadn't even thought about Amazing Race Canada. Now I'm sad again, man, because it got renewed, but now, yeah. Because the U.S. one, stopped their filming, so it's too bad. But yeah, definitely, I will say if you're a fan of those shows, you should definitely check them out. I am excited about Picard, but I don't have CBS All Access. I am going to ultimately get a free trial and then watch all the episodes once they've done the whole season.
Yep.
And then I will listen to the podcast too. But either way, I can't wait to hear what you guys think of that. So thanks for being on the show. This was really cool.
Thank you very much for having me. I know it's a little bit of a departure from what you usually tend to do on this show, but I'm really excited to have been a part of it. And I'm, as always, a big fan of what you're doing here.
No, it's great. Thank you. I like doing kind of different things, and I have not given Universal enough attention. So this is great to do. So thanks a lot.
I hope I did it justice.
If you enjoyed this podcast, you should definitely check out my shows with Seth Kubersky, who writes the unofficial guide to Universal Orlando, and author Jerry Green, who worked in entertainment at Universal for many years. You can find both of those at tomorrowsociety.com. I'm getting close to my 100th episode, and I would love your input for it. I'm going to answer listener questions during a Q&A portion of that episode. So if you could send your questions to dan@tomorrowsociety.com by email, Twitter, tomorrowsoc, Facebook or Instagram at Tomorrow Society, or just post them on Twitter with the hashtag TomorrowSociety100. I'd love to answer your questions about things that are going on in the theme park world, about this podcast, about attractions, basically anything you want to hear, and I'm really looking forward to doing that. That episode is going to be in April, and it'll be here before we know it. The Tomorrow Society podcast is hosted, produced, and edited by Dan Heaton. The music was written by Adam Hookey and performed by the Sophisticated Babies. If you'd like to support this show, you can do so by making a small monthly contribution through Patreon. You can learn more by going to tomorrowsociety.com/member. Thank you so much for listening, for all the support. Stay safe out there, and I'll talk to you again very soon.